Jerome David Salinger was an American writer. He was born in New York in 1919 in a family of immigrant Jews. When Salinger was born, his family had a well-off position, so despite the Great Depression of 1999, in 1932 they moved to a luxurious Park Avenue apartment in Manhattan. At school, he wrote for the school newspaper and appeared in plays. He showed an innate talent for drama, though his father opposed the idea of Jerome's becoming an actor. However, he was not a brilliant student. So, in 1934, his parents interned him in a military academy. 2 years later, his father offered him the opportunity to travel to Europe to learn language and to get started in the import business. So he spent 1 year between Austria and Poland. In Vienna, he stayed with a Jewish family and lived his first serious romance with their daughter. Back in New York, his first short story, The Young Folks, was published in 1940. But his most famous work was the novel The Catcher in the Rye, published 11 years later in 1951. This story would eventually become a classic of modern American literature. In 1942, Salinger enlisted in the army. He participated in the Battle of Normandy and was present in the catastrophic exercise Tiger, which had an outcome of more than 700 victims. After the war, Salinger didn't get the leave. He kept on working on counterintelligence tasks. However, his experiences in war had deeply dented him, and he probably suffered from what is known today as post-traumatic stress. So he eventually applied for treatment and was admitted to hospital. It is likely that he had discovered that the family he had lived with in Vienna, even the girl he had fell in love with, had all died in concentration camps. The emotional imprint that these events left in him can be perceived in his literary work, especially in Forest-Me with Love and Squalor and in A Perfect Day for Bananafish. Both of them are short stories and they are part of the collection published in 1953 entitled 9 Stories. A Perfect Day for Bananafish starts with a scene at a hotel room in Florida, where Muriel Glass waits for the operator to let her phone her mother. The hotel is full for a sales convention, so she must wait a long time. During that time, she fixes her clothing, paints her nails, and reads a magazine. When the call does go through, Muriel reassures her anxious mother about her safety. Her mother is concerned about the erratic, reckless behavior of Seymour, Muriel's husband. She reminds her daughter a car accident that Seymour and Muriel were involved in and suggests that Seymour deliberately crashed Muriel's father's car into a tree. Seymour has recently returned from war, and Muriel's mother believes he is mentally unstable. Muriel shows no concern. She is preoccupied by the fashion at the resort and the evening's events. In the evenings, there are formal dinners and cocktail parties at which Seymour often sits apart playing the piano. The resort is full of society people, although Muriel feels that the quality of these people had diminished since the war. She asks her mother not to worry and tells her that Seymour is on the beach by himself. On the beach, a 3-year-old girl, Sybil Carpenter, lets her mother put sunscreen on her body. Her mother misunderstands the girl's question, "Seymour Glass?" Mrs. Carpenter thinks the question is "See more glass?" and guess Sybil is saying nonsense. so she sends her away so that she can go have cocktails. Sybil wanders along the beach and eventually finds Seymour. They have a childish conversation about the color of her bathing suit, and Sybil accuses him of letting another girl, Sharon Lipschutz, sit on the bench with him while he played the piano. But Seymour assures Sybil that she is his favorite. In the water, Seymour puts Sybil onto the raft and says it's a perfect day for banana fish. He explains that these are normal-looking fish that swim into caves full of bananas and eat all of them. As a result, the banana fish become so fat that they can't leave their holes and die. Doubtful of the fish at first, the girl tells Seymour that she sees a banana fish with 6 bananas in his mouth. And when they finally get out of the water, the girl leaves. Seymour, alone again, collects his things and returns to the resort. On his way to his room, he accuses a woman in the elevator of looking at his feet. When the woman denies it, Seymour becomes irate, calling her a goddamn sneak. The woman leaves the elevator. Seymour proceeds to his room, where Muriel is napping. Sitting on the other bed, he watches her. Then he takes a gun from his luggage and shoots himself in the head. Seymour Glass is an outsider. He doesn't fit in his woman's life, nor in society in general. He is intelligent, but psychologically damaged from the war, so he can't interact in the adult society and renounces it in favor of poetry, music, and children. He is antisocial, whereas the others enjoy mingling at cocktail parties and dinners. While Muriel socializes, Seymour plays the piano by himself or spends time with children at the beach. For much of the story, Seymour seems placid and quiet, a stark contrast to the unbalanced, erratic Seymour that Muriel and her mother discuss on the phone. His outsider status seems, if not normal, then at least harmless. However, when Seymour angrily accuses the woman in the elevator of looking at his feet, another side of him becomes clear. Ultimately, Seymour is unable to reconcile his outsider status with society and kills himself. Muriel Glass is pretty and self-interested. She lives in the superficial, materialistic world in which Seymour is an outsider. She places great importance on her appearance, spends time reading vapid magazines, and is concerned with the ugly fashion of the people at the hotel. They don't get on well, they are unable to communicate. But Muriel seems to be innocently devoted to him. And though her mother criticizes Seymour's erratic behavior, Muriel dismisses it and seems to accept that Seymour's behavior is part of who he is. However, her unconcern also suggests that she is not aware of her husband's condition and ultimately enables Seymour to carry out his violent suicide. Sybil Carpenter, like Seymour, is alone and misunderstood. Her mother misunderstands her when she talks about Seymour Glass, thinking the girl says, "See more Glass." This fact suggests that Sybil too lives in a world where no one understands her. With Seymour, however, she speaks freely and randomly, and more important, she seems to understand Seymour in a way that adults cannot. Throughout the story, characters struggle to communicate with one another. For instance, Muriel never really hears her mother's worries, and Muriel's mother never really hears Muriel's reassurances that she is fine. Seymour is entirely unable to communicate with other people at the resort, preferring to sit alone playing the piano or spend time at the beach rather than try to enter into a society in which he feels like an outsider. Sybil's mother also fails to communicate with Sybil clearly, believing that Sybil says Seymour Glass when she is actually talking about Seymour Glass. Only Sybil and Seymour seem able to communicate effectively, although their discourse is on a child's level. Though Muriel and Seymour don't speak with each other in the story, we know that Muriel has no idea what is really going on in Seymour's mind, and Seymour seemingly has no desire to explain to her how he feels. Seymour's suicide is perhaps the one truly successful act of adult communication in the story, the one gesture that cannot be misread or ignored. Muriel wears a white silk dressing gown, fixes her sax blues, meticulously paints her nails, and uses fine leather luggage. These suggestions of luxurious lifestyle demonstrate the division between Muriel and Seymour. She reads women's magazines while Seymour reads poetry. She is more concerned with her clothes and the current fashion trends than with her husband's emotional and psychological problems. Salinger made a deliberate connection with Eliot's Wasteland. When Seymour and Sybil discuss about Sharon Lipschutz, Seymour says, "Ah, Sharon Lipschutz, how that name comes up, mixing memory and desire. Sybil, I'll tell you what we'll do. We'll see if we can catch a banana fish." The stanza of The Wasteland that contains these words is the burial of the dead. April is the cruelest month, breeding lilacs out of the deadland, mixing memory and desire, staring dull roots with spring rain. In fact, the name Sybil that Salinger uses for the character of the little girl comes from the excerpt from Petronius Arbiter's Satyricon that appears at the beginning of The Wasteland, which reads, "For once I saw with my own eyes the Cumean Sybil hanging in the jar. And when the boys asked her, 'Sybil, what do you want?' she answered, 'I want to die.'" The main symbol in the story are banana fish. These imaginary creatures that eat bananas till they die represent Seymour and his struggles to re-engage in society after returning from the war. He has been psychologically damaged by the war, and Muriel and her family exist in a world he doesn't understand, and his behavior in that world is inappropriate. His devotion to Sybil reveals his heartbreaking yearning for innocence and clarity, feelings that have no outlet in the adult world. Just as the banana fish become too fat to leave their holes, Seymour is fat from the overflow of painful emotion he cannot express. At the end of the story, he, like the banana fish, dies.